Hello, my name is Dr. Manny Ling. I'm the Interim Deputy Dean of the School of Communication of Design in RMIT Vietnam. Today, welcome to the episode of the CEI Podcast. We will be exploring the topic of cultural currency, how traditional Vietnamese craft is becoming modern IP. As you know, Vietnamese cultural heritage is full of artistry. So, for example, the distinctive lacquerware, the silk embroidery, the folk paintings, and the century-old patterns and motifs are very prevalent in the Vietnamese culture. So these traditions aren't just history, they are part of who we are. We are being reimagined and transforming them into intellectual property that resonates globally. So in this episode, we will uncover how some of the creators are bridging the old and the new, how we are honoring heritage while innovating for modern markets. We will talk about the creative process, the challenges of respectful commercialization, and strategies for reaching audience worldwide. So hopefully by the end of this session, we will be able to see how cultural heritage can be a dynamic currency for future creative ventures. So let's dive straight in. I would like to introduce to you in this session Ms. Nguyen, who's the director of Hanoi Grapevine, which is a non-profit arts and culture organization that acts as an independent platform for Vietnam's creative scene. Thank you for being here today. And I also have my second guest, Mr. Richard Arce, who is the program manager for Bachelor of Digital Media at RMIT Vietnam, who is also a world-renowned animator and artist, and formerly the president of ASIFA, the International Animation Film Association. So thank you both for being here today. So let's start the session straight away with defining what is cultural currency. Okay, maybe we start off with you.
So cultural currency is a concept that is quite interesting because it refers to one concept, the currency concept that we normally attach to money, right? But if we think of the etymology, actually you get that the word is much more interesting because currency comes from Latin, and in Latin you have correre, which is literally to run or that runs. So that's why it's referred to money. Money goes from one place to the other, right? And enrich the people as it flows. When we talk about cultural currency, this concept, I think it's much more interesting because it is these elements in the culture that go from one person to the other, from one community to the other, and enrich the communities by this fact of sharing and moving from one to the other. So language and cultural in general are attached to this concept of cultural currency. So it can transform into money, it can transform but also into cultural values and these other kind of values that also bring these elements to what it is to be creative, to what it is to create an IP.
Yeah.
So that's why I find this a specific word that is not only for money, but for when you extend to this other view on what it is, the human experience and the cultural experience is much more.
Yes, I'm really interested by what you say about the impact that it has on people and communities, not just in a local sense, but also globally as well, right? Yeah. Ms. Hang, I'd probably like to hear from your point of view, the sort of Vietnamese, within the Vietnamese context, what is cultural currency?
So actually, like when we mention about the cultural currency, is something like, of course, related to the economic value.
Yeah.
And then like we always think that like there must be some assets that like we can transform it into the economic value. We can exchange it into like some money, for example. But then like when we mention about the cultural assets, so it can be like tangible and intangible.
Yeah.
So how we can measure the intangible and then how we can exchange it. And especially right now we are so, because it's also not only deep rooted in the heritage, but also like we it's so embedded in the new culture, designs, fashion, and anything that like use the cultural aspect or like cultural, when I say in the cultural factors in the asset. So, for example, how we can monetize or mobilize the asset, so we can make it become the currency. So, I think that we can talk about, we can like focus about the intellectual property on the tangible asset and then intangible asset of the culture, and not only culture but also like in art sector and also like in
Yes.
creative industry.
That's very true. So, when you interpret a traditional craft or motif or artifact, what does the creative process look like in this sense? For example, quite often I see ancient folk paintings being used in new ways, in illustrations or packaging or and so on. I also see examples of folk tales being used in animation or children's books, developing characters for certain films or videos and so on. And I see lacquerware being used in modern homes, being redesigned for contemporary kind of use, etc. There's lots of examples and the list goes on. So I'm just wondering, how does one strike the balance between preserving the authenticity of the artifact or the culture and introduce into the modern aesthetics and current needs? I wondered if you could elaborate on this point.
So for me, so let me divide in the like two perspectives.
Yeah.
So first perspective will be the aesthetic heritage revival, where you can like interpreting the traditional motifs patterns as you firstly mentioned. We can use this on the packaging.
Yes.
And on like for the outlook. So and maybe like for the decorations. And the second one is about more like skill based heritage revival, where the craft techniques such as lacquer and skill embroidery or like the ceramic or silver work and being upgraded for the contemporary usage. So this one, I think that both of these approach can bring very not only like contemporary design but also like bring people always have the feel of, how can I say, like we are living in the modern that very use the heritage and traditional technique clever. However, I think that like there will be a lot of story about like how we use it and how we use it without how can I say, like being disrespect to the traditional artisans
Yes.
or like the craft makers. Another story.
Yes, so certainly there needs to have some kind of understanding of the cultural heritage that the designers are using for whatever their needs are. And quite often we see examples of, say, traditional patterns used inappropriately or used in in a wrong context. Ricardo, I wondered if you have any opinions about
Yeah, indeed. And I can talk so much from the perspective, for example, in Vietnam, as I can do for Latin America, for example, when
Sure.
there are cases, there have been a lot of cases where there's this misuse on the heritage and the tradition. And it's very important to highlight that when we do this, we have a responsibility with this very same heritage, because we are like, we can take it into at risk of diluting or misinterpreting what it's particular to this tradition. For example, in Latin America, in Colombia specifically, there was the situation for some textiles created by an indigenous community, Wayu community, and there was this designer who got the textiles, got the colors, the patterns that had some cultural, very important cultural meaning for the communities, and just created in Europe just a branch, a line, and started to sell it without acknowledging the culture, without giving back to the culture, and that created a big debate about the responsibility of the creator. So it is, we are part of a heritage. We can move around and enrich in many aspects the community, ourselves, and everybody around this work, as long also there is this responsibility on this to avoid appropriations. For
Yes.
example, I couldn't, as foreigner in Vietnam, I couldn't come and work on elements that are part of the Vietnamese culture, and so on with different traditions. So it's important for me to always be mindful about what is the relationship between my relationship to the place, for example, and the respect to that tradition, the acknowledgement of what is particular to what is happening there.
Yeah.
And I can see, for example, in my own work, I can see the influence of being here, and my way of thinking the world has been transformed. Also, it's shaping. It's normal. It's happening when you get a culture that is so rich, but at the same time, I need to always remind myself that to be respectful to how I approach to this.